The comedian uses his trademark style to expose the absurdities of life. Friday, March 7th at 8 p.m. Tickets at floridatheater.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, he chronicled life on the First Coast for more than 3 decades. On the heels of his retirement, we ask Matt Soergel about life lessons, favorite stories, and of course, surfing. Then, local writers and educators preview the upcoming curated poetry and music event, Dreamboat Poetry. And folk music takes center stage at Sundays at Stetson's, a monthly event at the home of the legendary folklorist and human rights activist, Stetson Kennedy. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. European nations are coming to Ukraine's defense following last Friday's fiery meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and President Trump. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is working to create a peace deal to end Russia's war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, top Republicans in the U.S. are questioning Zelensky's leadership of Ukraine following Friday's disastrous meeting. But NPR's Luke Garrett reports not all of the GOP is on the same page.
House Speaker Mike Johnson of Louisiana threw his support of Zelensky into doubt on Sunday. He told NBC News,
either he needs to come to his senses and come back to the table in gratitude, or someone else needs to lead the country to do that.
On Friday, following the tense Trump-Zelensky meeting, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina suggested Zelensky should resign or change. But on Sunday, GOP Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma told NBC News he disagrees.
I'm not interested in calling on the resignation of other world leaders.
Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont defended Zelensky outright on NBC News.
Zelensky is leading a country trying to defend democracy against an authoritarian dictator, Putin, who invaded his country.
Luke Garrett, NPR News, Washington.
Meanwhile, Speaker Johnson also criticized Vladimir Putin. Johnson says Putin is dangerous and not to be trusted. Israel is pressuring Hamas to agree to a new variation of the ceasefire agreement with Hamas for Gaza. Hamas has not accepted the change. NPR's Kat Lonsdorf says that now Israel has halted all relief supplies into Gaza.
Israel has stopped the flow of much-needed aid, like food and medical supplies, into the enclave. Israel controls what gets in and out of Gaza, and aid groups have warned that this blocking of aid violates international law. Other Arab countries have condemned it.
NPR's Kat Lonsdorf reporting. Israel says the change to the ceasefire calls for the release of more hostages and that it retains the right to go back to war if negotiations fail. Hamas says Israel is working to evade the original agreement. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that more than 160 measles cases have been reported across the country this year. NPR's Amy Held reports that most stem from a growing outbreak in West Texas.
Friday, the Texas Capitol confirmed its first measles case in years, an unvaccinated infant in Austin. To the north in Lubbock, Shanae Brown worries for her newborn, too young for the vaccine recommended at 12 months.
I really want her to have it, especially with the first case of someone dying recently.
Officials confirmed February 26 an unvaccinated child died in the outbreak. In Gaines County, where it started, the kindergarten vaccination rate is around 82%. To protect against outbreaks, the CDC says it should be 95%. Amy Held, NPR News.
You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It is now 9:04. Today is the deadline to register to vote, update your voter information, or change your party affiliation for the upcoming special election in Northeast Florida. The election will be held on April 1st to fill the Congressional District 6th seat, which includes parts of Flagler, Putnam, and St. Johns counties. 5 candidates are running, including Democrat Andrew Weil and Republican Randy Fine, who has been endorsed by President Trump. To find out if you're eligible to vote, visit your county's Supervisor of Elections office website. The ViStar Foundation has opened its annual military grant cycle to provide funding for nonprofit organizations dedicated to helping active duty military veterans and their families. ViStar says this year's grant cycle will prioritize nonprofits that address challenges like food and housing insecurity, employment, small business support, and access to mental health services. The foundation will award grants of up to $20,000 to eligible nonprofit organizations, with the final amount being determined by its board of directors. Applications must be submitted by 5 p.m. on March 30th. It'll be a nice day overall weather-wise here in Northeast Florida. We'll have high temperatures this afternoon, reaching the mid-60s after this chilly start. Tonight, partly cloudy with lows dropping down into the lower 50s. Looking ahead to Wednesday, that's whenever showers and thunderstorms are in the forecast during the day. The National Weather Service office says the main timing looks to be between 10 and 6 during the day.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts. And the Public Welfare Foundation, committed to advancing transformative youth and criminal justice reforms.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a first-class chronicler of the First Coast ends his newspaper career at the Florida Times-Union. We ask Matt Soergel what he's learned from the people who've trusted him to tell their stories. Later in the program, celebrating the legacy of First Coast human rights activist and author Stetson Kennedy through the Baloo-Tehachapi music series. But first, from great leads to powerful endings, Matt Soergel has helped tell the story of the First Coast for the past 35 years. Now it's time for his exit interview. Matt, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
How did you get into feature writing and journalism in the first place?
Mostly a lack of ambition in other fields. Writing was the only thing I could ever really do.
Yeah.
That might make a living.
When did you know that you were able to write?
About 7 or 8.
Wow.
Yeah, such as it is. I would write little things for school, and they'd make me read them out loud. And I have one on my fridge that's kind of funny, about a storm coming, and another one about a deer in the woods and hearing the crack of a rifle, and just little things like that.
Huh. So you kind of had an early observant eye and ear.
Yeah, and I always loved newspapers. Even as a boy, I read them, and as a young guy reading Robert Hilburn in the LA Times, writing about rock and roll, and I was like, you can make a living doing that, And was just always curious about people, so that I think that steered me towards feature writing. And I'm not much of a super hard news animal when it comes to myself, so I really appreciated the chance to meet people and tell their stories.
And you talk about LA. You were raised primarily in Southern California?
Eventually, yeah. My dad was in the Foreign Service, so we moved around a lot, from Taiwan to D.C. to London. When he went to Vietnam, we couldn't go to Vietnam with him, so we visited my mom's family in London for a few years, and then eventually out to California, for high school and college.
And how do you think that early, living abroad impacted your view of people and the stories you ultimately ended up telling?
Yeah, I think it might have made me more open-minded, and I didn't really feel super connected to America necessarily. So I was always kind of an observer, always a little bit on the outside, and I had a hard time really joining in things participating. I was always more of that sort of fly on the wall. I mean, I had close friends, but and I think that all kind of set me up. When I think back on it now, kind of set me up for this life.
Yeah. You played some soccer through college, right?
Through college, and then in a high school and college, and then adult leagues till my knees gave out.
Okay. Are you still a big fan?
I love it. Yeah.
Who are your teams?
I love Chelsea.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've been following AC Milan with the American Christian Pulisic playing for
Mhm.
them, so it's been fun.
Yeah. You're also a big surfer.
Yeah, I've not been able to give that up. That's the one thing that doesn't hurt. I've been surfing for about 50 some years now, and still really love it and look forward to it.
And it is sort of a solitary sport, isn't it?
Yeah, I like surfing with my buddies and stuff, but yeah, you're out there and you're on your own and most of the time.
Contemplative.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you write about surfers quite a bit. You have,
Mhm.
just because you're very connected to that community. Do you see any connections between kind of the the practice of being a writer and the athleticism and sort of the engagement of surfing?
Never really thought of that. Um, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really
Just two
picture that.
pastimes.
Just two separate things. I mean, I think a lot out there in surfing, and I relate to surfers. So, and there are really some really great stories in our area, surfers. Uh, I met the surfing Swami who grew up on the west side and became a Hare Krishna monk and introduced surfing to India, and met him when he came back here for the first time in 50 years, and met him at the Jacks Beach Pier with his old buddies, and they were like teenagers again, and it was really fun. So he was a celibate Krishna, a monk for many, many decades. And
You find so many interesting characters in your writing and have over the years. You really are the kind of writer that other writers like myself would be like, how did you, find that character? How did you find that person? I mean, is it just sort of being around that allows you to pick up on the threads of these really unusual stories? Because you're very often the first to sort of, I hate the word surface as a verb, but kind of bring forth these characters that we haven't really heard of before. They're not, everybody knows them type stories.
yeah, I think after a while, people started telling me about them. Like the surfing Swami, I got a call, one night. Can you meet at the pier tomorrow morning? This guy's coming in. But I'd heard about him a couple years before, and I was like, let me know when he comes to town, that kind of thing. And another surfer story I did was on Ed Romer, who's known as Dangerous Dad, and he surfed on a huge board out at the end of the pier, and the kids called him Dangerous Dad and thought he lived under the pier. But
Because he would sort of come like barreling through when he got his wave, and you just sort of have to dive out of the path of Dangerous Dad.
Mostly. And what a great guy. I'd interviewed him one time for a story on different kind of surfers. He was one of the older surfers in the area at the time. And then I saw him on the Surf Report like 20 years later, and I phoned him up and said, hey, do you remember me? And he goes, well, I'm looking at your story. It's in the kitchen, on the kitchen wall, which made me feel really good. And that's the kind of impact these stories have with the people you write about. But he asked me, he said, can we talk a little bit later? My wife's not doing so well. And so we waited, and his wife passed away, and I met him at the pier again a few months after that, and he was in a contemplative mood talking about his life and how it's changed. And so it was a real meaningful story. And then and I got to talk to a lot of people about Dangerous Dad and talk to his daughter, and it was really powerful kind of stuff, this older guy mourning, but trying to find solace in the waves. And then unfortunately, a few years later, I wrote his obituary when he died. He was checking on a neighbor's house up in the Georgia mountains, and the ATV went off the road and into a ditch or a ravine. So that was sad, but it's like a full circle sort of thing. You're here long enough, and you just see people through all stages of their lives.
You have done that in a number of cases, and we will talk about that. But in that particular story, there was this sort of great moment when you were first talking to him after he lost his wife, and he was saying he just kind of didn't have the heart to surf anymore. But at the end of the piece, he sort of grabs his board and he's like, Want to paddle out?
Want to paddle out, and I did. We paddled out together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're talking to Matt Soergel. He has ended his nearly 35-year career at the Florida Times-Union as a feature writer and a movie reviewer and a journalist. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. We've got a call from Bill in Neptune Beach. Good morning, Bill. Go ahead.
Good morning, Matt. Good to talk to you. Thank you, Ann, for having Matt on. Over the years, I've enjoyed his many feature stories, especially one about the swimming area on the Swanee River. The man maintained a kind of a private open park for people to enjoy a trip to the beach without having to go all the way to the beach. And they would have to swing out on a rope and land in the water and park their cars and have a family time on the banks of the Swanee. Matt, did you bring your banjo along so you can demonstrate your new clawhammer banjo style?
Working on that, Bill. This is Bill Longenecker. I wrote about him. He gave the surf report for many, many years. Finally gave it up. The telephone surf report.
A very recognizable voice to the surfers of the First Coast, Bill is.
Everyone knows Bill.
Well, thanks for calling in, Bill. And you did promise that in your retirement you're going to work on your banjo.
Yes.
Yeah. Where do you stand with that? You are a musician, we should say.
Yeah, I play a variety of stringed instruments, but I'm really struggling with the clawhammer banjo, which is the old-fashioned banjo from the mountains.
All right.
And it just fascinates me, and I'm going to crack the code one day.
All right. We'll have you back when you do. We've also got a call from Charles on the west side. Good morning, Charles. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Matt, it's great. You've had a wonderful career. I'm going to miss your articles, but the best line I ever saw in a music review in the Times-Union was by the great Claudia Perry. They compared Steve Perry's singing to Donald Duck on Helium. And my question was, why such a dearth of music reviews? Tom writes one every now and then, but we hardly see them anymore. Is it because of the reporter hits that you guys take?
Yeah, it's been tough. That's no secret what's happened to the newspaper industry. We just don't have as many people to do all the things we used to do. Mm-hmm. It's really sad, but I think we're still doing some really good work. The guys that are there, they're still really amazing journalists, and they're great journalists all through the city. And the station here is doing some really great stuff. So it's sort of like everyone's almost pitching in together to cover Jacksonville, and you'll see new news models. And I think as time goes on, because leaving a city uncovered is just criminal.
The music reviews. I mean, there was a time when a lot of big city papers had not just a music reviewer, but somebody that did classical and somebody that did pop music and somebody that did, soul music. I mean, there was actually, disciplines devoted to a single kind of music, whereas now, as Charles says, there hardly is any music coverage at all.
Yeah. Same thing with film. I used to write about movies, had a nice mid-career break doing that, and they most of the critics went away for the papers, and I was lucky to be able to stay on and do what I'm doing up until now.
You are a very conversational writer. People who are familiar with your work will know that there's a lot of phrases like "after all" or "of course." You're kind of speaking to the reader in a way that is bringing them along with this shared understanding of the evolution of the story. How do you think about your writing style?
I want it to seem as if there's a human being. My late wife, when I met her, she was like, "You're a newspaper reporter? I thought newspapers were written by computers." And I was really offended. I was like, I laughed. I got her point. But there's that stilted journalistic style. And I just, and there's a place for that, for the strict, get the facts out. But I always wanted to tell a story. And I've told people over the years that I was really struck. Remember E.T. when they're trying to get him up the stairs and they leave the Reese's Pieces along the stairs? That's kind of what I think of it. I'm vain enough to think that if somebody starts one of my stories, I want them to finish it. So I'm always trying to leave them little Reese's Pieces to keep going, or hints of something coming up. And that's how you tell a story around the fire. You say, here's the lead of the story. Hey, did you hear about the guy who escaped the mental asylum with a hook on his hand? That's your lead. And then you go back and you start telling the story, and it's chronologically is really great if you can do that. It's storytelling. So I'm always conscious of who might be reading and what they might need out of this story.
You, one of your coworkers left us a voice memo when we said we were going to be talking to you today. He's a wonderful reporter and columnist, Mark Woods. But he talked about how he would turn to you when he was needing some help and guidance with writing. Let's take a listen.
Hi, this is Mark Woods. I'm definitely going to miss having Matt as a coworker. Whenever I've struggled with how to structure a story, I've often turned to Matt. He just has a knack for that. I don't think he's ever written a bad story, and it's really hard to pick favorites because so many have been so wonderful. But a couple come to mind just because we worked on it together. One was an Axe Handle Saturday anniversary story that we both wrote together, and that combining two voices is never easy, but Matt made it easy. The other was when I turned 40, we did a little thing where it was, can you teach a 40-year-old how to surf? And I don't know that Matt succeeded in that, but we had fun trying. And at the time, 40 seemed old. It does not anymore. But I know Matt will still be out there on the waves, so we wish him well.
So, first of all, can you teach a 40-year-old to surf? Did that come to fruition?
It's possible. They better have a lot of time on their hands.
Yeah.
It's much easier to learn when you're a teenager.
He referenced Axe Handle Saturday anniversary story, and the paper often turned to you for these big retrospective pieces where you were trying to tell a piece of Jacksonville history, often through some very interesting people that you would, come to. How did you approach those stories perhaps differently than a smaller, quieter feature?
I would often turn to the primary source, which was the newspapers themselves, and try and immerse myself and squint at the microfilm, try to read the microfilm, and just sort of try and give a feel for what was going on in the city at that time. And often it was dramatic. So the story, when I write a story, I try to match the tone of the story to the tone of the writing to the gravity or the frivolity of the story. So it's not just one size fits all. You sort of slide into the voice that you need.
When you would go back and look at microfilm, would you look just at the story relevant to what you were covering, or would you kind of read through the paper of that day or that period and see other stuff that was going on?
Yeah, I would get distracted and look at the ads and things, and often that kind of helped. I did one deep dive history story, and I drew in what else was going on in the city and kind of showing the kind of free for all that Jacksonville was back then, with all this crazy stuff going on and colorful characters, and tie all that in. It's really fascinating.
I want to ask you just about the trust that you build with your subjects, because you have covered some stories that were at a very difficult time for some people. I can think of, and we might have an image of the story that you did on the search for Mason McLeod. Was a young man who went missing in Alaska. But you did this story just very soon after the search was called off, and you were using, you were talking to his family who are still desperately searching for him, and using even his diary entries.
Yeah, the diary entries he kept an online kind of diary blog, and that was just speaking with Mason himself, having the chance to interview him. That was probably the most meaningful story I've ever done. I'd heard about Mason from a young friend who said, "You'd love this guy I know, Mason. He's really fascinating," and he told me about him. And then a few months later, I saw a little clip that we had in the paper, a little story about a missing Jacksonville man in Alaska, and I knew that was him. He'd left, and he was a park ranger at the Everglades and up in Alaska as well. And he just had a zest for life and a zest for this new life. And his plane that he was in with three other fellas disappeared. And I reached his parents, Steve and Sue, and they've remained friends. And I see them every once in a while.
How do you approach a family in that situation, though, when you're trying to learn more about their loved one, but also knowing that this is just a very difficult time for them?
Yeah. I just try to be a human being, let them say what's comfortable to them, push them a little bit maybe if you need to but always be sympathetic to people in that situation, of course. You can't just barge in and stick a microphone in front of their face and kind of yell at them. And being a father myself, you take that sort of empathy, and I think even someone who wasn't a father would take that empathy in, but just try and honor their story, really, and tell it as well as you can.
And you know that these stories will, in some cases or many cases, end up, as you say, on the wall in their house. It's not a story that people might soon forget, especially on a topic like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've got a call from Todd Rubin in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Todd. Go ahead.
Hey, and thank you. Matt, congratulations on your well-deserved retirement. For those of you that are listening and watching, Matt is not only a phenomenal writer, but he's an awesome surfer. So from witnessing out there and paddling out in the water myself. But Matt, of all of the film and television productions that you covered that filmed here in Jacksonville, from Joel Schumacher directing Tigerland with Colin Farrell to Recount, with Kevin Spacey, Laura Dern, and Lonely Hearts with Jared Leto, Gandolfini, and Travolta, Basic. What was the one that really stood out of all of them that you felt that was that really stood out of all the ones that you critiqued over the years?
I still remember Basic, which shot out at Cecil Field, and watching John Travolta. I guess he was throwing someone out of an airplane or something like that over and over and over as they tried to get just the right take. With I think it had fake rain falling and all these stars running around. Samuel L. Jackson, I got to talk to him, and that was a fun one. And it seemed kind of like really big time. It was really exciting. And it was like, 2 a.m. we were out on the tarmac at Cecil Field. You remember that one?
Do remember it.
Yeah.
And I know that as far as the most critically acclaimed film that you wrote about, and I remember you felt that that won awards was a Recount. I recall you did a very nice article on that.
Yeah, I thought that was really a really good movie.
Yeah. Certainly a pivotal point in history, not just in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
but in the nation's history. One thing that you are known for is telling human and animal stories in a really empathetic way. A beautiful story that you did about a ultra marathoner who ran with his dog that he had discovered when he was running
In Brazil. Yeah,
Tell us a little bit about that story of Lucky and how you came across that.
Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember how I found out about Lucky. David might have emailed me. David Green is a great guy, lives in Jacksonville, and he was running an ultra marathon in Brazil through the hills and the mountains and the jungle, and this stray dog fell in next to him, as stray dogs do when they run, as when the runners run, and the dog just stayed with him and just never left him. So he brought him back, and then they ran across the country, and Lucky had cancer and didn't quite make it. But David told the story really well. He's got a book about it out now called Lucky. It's really good. And
But that initial run, I mean, the dog just didn't kind of run along. He ran for like 140 miles
Oh, yeah,
alongside of
yeah.
him, with him.
yeah, and there was one point actually where they got separated, and Lucky sought him out and found him, miles and miles away. And they just felt this spark, and David spoke very well about that.
Yeah.
And And I was just touched by this dog companion, and then their final run. Lucky did as much as he could, and David thought about leaving him behind, but he knew that that's what the dog wanted. And one day, the Lucky just got out of the RV and took a few steps and just kind of like, I'm done.
And so he had to euthanize Lucky on
Yeah,
that run.
yeah. His driver took Lucky back to a vet, and David kept running. And he told me he was just running, crying across the Wyoming, I think it was, and saw this little bridge over a tiny creek and went down. And there was a father and a son fishing down there. And they said it was the first time they'd ever seen anyone join them. And I think the father said, "Looks like you could use a beer." And he goes, "Yeah, I could." And he sat down and had a beer with these guys.
Wow.
Yeah.
Another story that was also very emotional is the Goodbye to Ruby Ann, which is a story that you did
Oh my.
that documented a person who does in-home euthanasias for older pets. And, I cried from the beginning of the of the first sentence. I think that everyone in the story cried. How are you reacting as a reporter in that moment in such an emotional time?
It gives you a little bit of a remove, I think, if you just stay back. I mean, I was very moved, but I needed to watch everything that's going on and not lose it myself. That doesn't always happen, but that was a real memorable story. And the couple, Ruby Ann's people who invited me in, I was just eternally grateful to them. I mean, and watching, Ruby Ann came up to me, and when I came in, and she doesn't know that she was sick, really. I don't think she was happy, but it was time, for her to go.
Mm-hmm. So we also heard from one of your most recent editors, Scott Butler. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Scott Butler here, Matt's editor these last few years. I think people in Matt's stories could relate to him because he was so genuine and laid back. It was easy for them to feel comfortable around him and tell their story. People forget that he wrote movie reviews for a long time, and he also performed as a musician on the side. And who doesn't like movies and music? The funny thing about Matt was he'll readily tell you he is not very computer savvy, so sometimes that was his biggest challenge in journalism. But what sticks with me is the personal stuff, like sharing videos of his grandkids doing the Duval or dancing a jig, and talking Jags, life, and even difficult times.
So he references difficult times. A lot of people will know that you lost your first wife, Robin, in 2020. She was a wonderful woman, a very beloved songwriter and performer around the First Coast. Did that experience change how you reported stories, do you think?
Yeah, it did. It was, I think I was pretty much set on my path at that time when it came to reporting, but I think it gave me maybe even more empathy. And sometimes you want to share a little bit about yourself with the people that you're interviewing. You don't want to go overboard and tell them your whole life story, but, sometimes I'd mention that with someone who maybe had gone through something similar. And
Yeah. One of the stories that you tell so well and is about a difficult time in someone's life, but it's also really kind of light moment is this couple that got married. They met in hospice, and you sort of begin the story talking about how they met having cigarettes together in the smoking section of the hospice, which is sort of this. It's hilarious and very sad because they're both in there because of smoking related illnesses, and they're not that old, but that was a remarkable story of this couple in their very last days deciding that they wanted to spend the rest of their life together. And you even say they're doing their vows, and they say until death do us part.
yeah, and she just said, the bride told me, she said, "I'm just tired of being alone." And they had this time together, and I was invited to their wedding at the hospice down in Green Cove Springs. And it was that was kind of like a fly on the wall kind of story. I just sat back and just watched everything happen. And you look for like human moments to tell the story. I think sometimes people sort of overlook the human moments, like in favor of the official kind of moments. But I ended the story. I had an editor who I loved very much. We worked together as young men and then reunited later in Jacksonville. Joe Fenton. He was just a classic newspaper man, and he would sit there and read a story. And if he had a good ending, he would lean back and lace his hands over his stomach and say, "Good walk-off." And this one had a good walk-off because at the end there, she takes the piece of cake and stuffs it against his face like you're supposed to, and it, goes all over his face. And he takes a little piece of cake and starts lifting it toward her face, and everybody leans in and like, "Ah!" And then he just very carefully, without missing a crumb, puts it in her mouth. And everyone just kind of sighs. It was just a sweet moment that maybe someone else might have overlooked. But to me, that was sort of like the key to the whole thing.
That wasn't the only wedding that you attended that you were invited to for someone that was close to death. You also did a story about a man, a race car driver who had ALS, and you also attended his wedding.
Yeah, that was through Bob Self, our fine photographer at the time, and he told me about him, and it was just really meaningful. He'd met a woman, and he wanted to get married, and he wanted to go out on his own terms, and he did in all respects. He was a dashing, sort of debonair, handsome race car driver, and we had a great photo of him that he shared of with go-go girls in New York City on top of a Austin Healey 3000 sports car. Convertible. Yeah. And I used that image as like, just show I think that was my lead, him at the top of the world. And
this dashing playboy sort of.
Yeah. He wasn't always, a man dying. He was this handsome, dashing guy. And he lived his life that way with a real flair.
You are, leaving journalism at a time when a lot is changing. And you're leaving, I guess, because you are choosing to, maybe just ready for a change. What do you anticipate doing, and what do you foresee just for the place that you're leaving behind?
I'd like to maybe do some freelance stuff, maybe do some of my own writing, while taking part in a lot of physical stuff, I hope, bike riding and surfing, and trying to keep fit for the next umpteen years. And newspapers, I think we touched on it briefly. I think they're in a really precarious place. Not sure. But I remember, like, when I got into newspapers in the early 80s, in graduate school, people, "Why are you doing that? They're going to be dead in 3 years." And they lasted a bit longer than that. And I think we're going to see more kind of cooperative ways of doing it already. We share news, the station and the paper, and
which was unheard of when we began
our
careers.
We
it was
carefully
all,
guarded.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, real strong boundaries. But I do think journalists tend to be really idealistic, and I think they see that as a way of still doing what they can with the limited resources we all have, and urge people to support all the local news outlets because they're desperately needed.
Doing incredible work still.
Yeah, and look at what the paper did with the JEA scandal, and among other publications, saving Jacksonville taxpayers a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, certainly the First Coast would not be the same without the work that all of you guys have done, and especially you. So thanks so much for almost 35 years in the business.
Thanks, you.
All right. Matt Soergel, thanks for being here. Up next, a night of powerful verse with an acclaimed poet. Welcome back. The Dreamboat Writers Series connects local and nationally acclaimed poets, and the upcoming edition features a standout guest. Here to tell us about it is Dorsey Craft, poet and professor at the University of North Florida, which is a partner in the event. Welcome, Dorsey.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're also joined by Jessica Stark, an assistant professor and writer at UNF as well in the English department. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Sure. And we're also joined by 2020 Jacksonville Youth Poet Laureate Reign Supreme. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, Jessica, you are an accomplished writer. You won the Florida Book Award. You were a finalist for the 2023 Maya Angelou Book Award. Why did you want to help create this event, this series?
Sure. It's a passion of mine to bring poetry to the larger community of Jacksonville. I've been organizing poetry series for the past decade, and I thought it would be a great way to bridge UNF and the UNF community to the larger community and bring our audience out for the enjoyment of the city of Jacksonville.
And so, for people who aren't familiar with the Dreamboat series, explain a little bit about what the idea is behind it and how it works.
Sure. So we basically bring in poets, nationally acclaimed poets, to the Jacksonville area, and we pair them with local readers, local poets. In the past, we've also collaborated with local musicians, and there will be books for sale. Poets will read from their latest books, and yeah, it's just a kind of a fun way to sort of bring visiting writers to be in collaboration with what we have to offer here in Jacksonville.
And Rain, obviously, you're a local poet. You've been writing from a very young age, and you've won a lot of awards and a lot of recognition for it. What does an event like this do for you in terms of, bringing you together with an artist from the national scene and also being able to present your own work?
I always look forward to any opportunity to just be able to share my work with new audiences and connect with new artists. So I think this event just serves as a wonderful opportunity to make those connections with the other artists that are featuring who I've never met before. So I'm really excited to just hear their work and see their style. But also, I think it connects me with a different audience altogether because I come from like a slam background. So this is a little different. It's a little different than like my normal demographic of performance.
Tell us, how will this differ from a slam poetry event that you're more used to?
Well, one, it's definitely more relaxed. It's slam is very intense. But it's definitely like less intense, more I feel like intentional with just the goal of sharing work because you don't have to deal with like the peskiness of competition.
Right.
Like,
Right. Dorsey, how important is it for people to hear poetry?
It's incredibly important. I think most of the time when people come into mine and Jess's creative writing classes at UNF, they're sort of unaware that people are out there writing poetry at all. And I remember being in that same place myself when I was, 15 or 16, and it was just a whole new world that opened up for me, getting to go into workshops and read all these amazing artists that are just doing incredibly innovative things on the page with language. So yeah, it's incredibly important.
For people who are not, skilled poetry readers or perhaps not very conversant in poetry, are there certain gateways that you offer them to learn about it or to have a greater appreciation for poetry?
Well, I think the reading series is that gateway, right? Getting to see a poet in front of you doing their thing, and it's there is something about like the live medium that really makes you feel like you get it in a way that if you sat down and read it on the page, you might feel a little shut out. I think that like that's the importance of the live element that Dreamboat is kind of trying to bring.
And Rain, I know that you are a very prolific poet. I wonder if you'd be comfortable reading one of your poets or reciting one of your poems here today.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm doing it right now.
Sure.
Okay. Let me think. Okay.
What's it called?
So this one is called Moonlight. Uh, it's a little short piece. If I'm sorry, I'm just
That's fine. Take your time.
yeah.
So it's called Moonlight, and it is. How recently did you write it?
I wrote this like 3, 4 years ago. I am often inspired by a lot of different things. One of them being film. So like literally the first line is from the movie Moonlight.
Oh, wonderful.
If it'll pull up.
Well, while we're waiting for him to look, Jessica, this event is obviously it's free and open to the public. Um, is it? Who do you think it's for?
For anybody that is interested in learning a little bit more about poetry. We have 3 readers that have incredibly different styles. They're coming from different places. We have a little bit for everybody.
And you should just tell us who those folks are.
Sure. So we'll be featuring Reign Supreme with us here today. We'll be also featuring Avni Vyas, who's coming from Tallahassee. And we'll also be featuring Dorothy Chan, who's coming, flying from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire.
All very
All very different.
all very
Yes.
different and all very esteemed poets. You all set, Rain?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. So this is Moonlight parentheses Black Boys Rainbow. In moonlight, black boys look blue, and our bruises become camouflage, invisible. Our tears become silver, prized possessions that others aren't worthy of, but will quickly trade them for the green. Trying to chase a dream, trying to chase a life we never seen, a happiness we weren't allowed to have, ain't never seen a yellow sun, ain't never felt a ray of joy, and as long as we can find gold, we won't ever need it. See, we spent our whole lives chasing white lights that chose to never shine on our black souls, being told that life exists in gray areas, but we've never been quite able to find them, so we disappear into the darkness, with only crimson stains and white outlines to show that we ever existed. So yeah, in the moonlight, black boys look blue. I say.
Thanks, Rain. It's a beautiful poem. If people are interested in getting involved in this event, does UNF sort of offer a connection there for people, Dorothy, or is there like is it just Dreamboat stands on its own?
We're supported by UNF. If you want to like follow us to see where our next event is going to be, we do kind of try to float around each season to a different spot around Jacksonville. This kind of 24-25 season, we've been over at Myrtle Avenue Brewing. Next year, we're hoping to go to the greenhouse.
In Brooklyn.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. But the best way to kind of keep up with that is to follow us on Instagram at Dreamboat Poetry. And
Do you encourage do you see interest from your students in poetry, and how would you say it compares to years past?
I see some interest. We get some students coming over there. I think that the ones who come once tend to come back again. They get really invested in the series and invested in poetry from having that experience.
Yeah. And Rain, would you encourage people to be working on poems and attending slams, or is it the kind of thing that's better spent in a writing class or a workshop before just embarking on?
I think it is always wonderful to go to workshops and writing classes just to really like sharpen your pen and like get that honed in on. But ultimately, I would say, stepping out into like open mics and slams and whatnot, it's a beautiful thing because that's that like for lack of a better term, that's that on the job training. You learn a lot of stuff as a performer by performing. So
But it is sort of a terrifying jump into that world. I mean, a lot of people think of poetry as sort of a solitary experience, and you're
Mhm.
sort of behind closed doors. Performance is a very different game.
It definitely is. I will say that. I know mine's perspective is a little biased and skewed because that's the background from which I come from.
Mhm.
But I do understand for certain people, like that's not the easiest thing to do. So that's why I would say start off with like an open mic. Like don't jump into slam. Slam is a competition, but an open mic, and make sure it's one where it feels like a safe space where you could just come and share your work, and you hear other artists and people, and you can just improve as time goes on.
Reign Supreme, Dorsey Craft, Jessica Stark, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, a concert series honoring Florida author and civil rights champion Stetson Kennedy.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. One texter call can wreck it all. Learn more through distracted driving presentations for teens and the workforce. Arrive alive. Let's end distracted driving.
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com.
Liberty Life, the pro-military paper and audio articles from Kings Bay to Camp Blanding. Serves Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and Marines. Liberty Life is available wherever the military, veterans, and their families gather. Online at libertylifemedia.com.
On the next Fresh Air, how life can change in a second. Writer Hanif Qureshi's first film, 1985's My Beautiful Laundrette, starred Daniel Day-Lewis and won Qureshi an Oscar for Best Screenplay. In 2022, he fell, and when he regained consciousness, his limbs were paralyzed. We'll talk about life before and after the fall. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Once they raise prices and they find that their customers are not running away in sufficiently large numbers to bring down their profits, but that they can actually increase their profits, they keep doing that as everybody else is doing it, and you kind of have entered a new type of game.
Understand the world we live in now. That's On Point with me, Meghna Chakrabarti.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Americans are split over this guy.
If we don't do this, America will go bankrupt.
Elon Musk is moving fast and breaking things in the federal government, but he also gets billions in government contracts and is cutting agencies that regulate him. Who's holding Musk to account? The firings, the fallout, and the fury. Next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Author, folklorist, and civil rights activist Stetson Kennedy believed in the power of words to spark change, and a concert series at his beloved First Coast homestead keeps that spirit alive. Here to tell us about her upcoming performance at Beloofahachie is St. Augustine musician-songwriter Catherine Archer. Welcome, Kat.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm a huge fan.
Oh, well, it's great to have you here. Is this your first time performing at Sundays at Stetson's?
It is. It is. I've been there before just to visit, but never performed there. So this is going to be very exciting for me.
This is a property that's in Fruit Cove, but for people who haven't been there, it is where he used to live.
Yes, it is. It's his former home. It's at 1523 State Route 13 in Fruit Cove, Beloofahachie, which is now a state park.
Yeah, and it was a land that he acquired and lived on and tried to create some...
Yeah, a nature preserve, and he wanted to preserve it for future generations. So, and the house is an amazing structure, and it also features a Woody Guthrie room where Woody Guthrie actually penned some of his works. And that's pretty exciting just to see that as a singer-songwriter and anybody else who's interested in that. So... So it happens every second Sunday, 2 p.m. to 4. It's a free concert series. It's also, we ask if you want to donate something, that's great because it all goes towards the future performances. And next month we'll have John Dickey. The following month, Sam Paccetti.
Mm-hmm.
So,
also a legend in
yes.
local circles.
Legendary
and
finger
that,
style. Player,
extraordinary musician.
Definitely.
You've shared the stage with some folk legends yourself. You've performed alongside Tom Chaplin and Peter Yarrow and Pete Seeger.
Pete Seeger, yes.
Yeah. What's that like?
Whew. I was a lot younger, and I probably wasn't as smart as I am now. I don't think I realized how influential and important that was at the time. But I feel like, that movie recently, the Bob Dylan movie,
Mm-hmm.
The Great Unknown, how he talks about going to see his mentor, Woody Guthrie, and getting that spark. I think that I received the spark then, but it lay dormant till I moved to Florida, which is interesting. But yeah, Pete was amazing, and I think Ed Norton totally nailed his character in the movie.
Yeah.
He was just so accessible, and of course, he started the Clearwater Sloop Foundation, which was responsible for actually cleaning up the Hudson River. So, and also this concert series is managed now by Lullabies of the Rivers Foundation, which is a non-for-profit. We just had our festival 2 weeks ago.
And your music has a environmental bent to it.
Absolutely,
How do you incorporate that into just kind of your musical style and the musical messaging that you have outside of the lyrics?
I try to let the music kind of be like, I think of Florida and nature as my musical palette, so to speak. So I try to weave the sounds of create a vibe behind the lyrics that causes you to think about and experience that which you're hearing, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just by feel, and just I try to hook in. I'm very empathetic. I just try to hook in and feel what is appropriate at each time. So
You're also a bit of an educator. I mean, you've written a children's book that actually I think you'd envisioned as an animated feature. But
yes, I co-wrote this with Linda Thornburg of Charlottesville, Virginia. She's actually a screenwriter and an author, and it all started with a couple friends calling me Snorkel McCorkle because my mother's name is McCorkle. And I finally, after years of thinking about this, I thought, wow, this would be a great character for a kid's book. And so I wrote her into life through song, and then I wrote a couple more songs, and my friend said, can I make a screenplay out of this and a book? So that's what we did. And it's actually STEM, standard of learning compatible, because I've done a lot of work in schools. And so one of our goals was to really make it teachable and fun, educational, but with a real environmental message.
yeah, which will be on display in your performance.
Mhm.
We should say again, it's Sunday, March 9th. Music
Yes.
starts at 2.
Absolutely. And you can also tour Stetson's home after the show if you'd like to.
Which is a
And
cool place. It has a bathroom sink made of a giant oyster shell.
beautiful place,
Or
beautiful
clam, I
place.
guess. Anyway,
Yes.
Kat Archer, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and that's our program. Thank you for listening. If you have comments or feedback, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock or find our entire archive at WJCT.org and your favorite podcast platform. The executive producer of First Coast Connect is David Luckin. Our show is produced by Stacey Bennett and directed by Brady Coram. Jamie Valet is our associate producer, and our theme music is performed by Club de Belugas, although we're going to be hearing a little bit of Cat's music on the way out here. Join us tomorrow when we talk to the St. John's Riverkeeper about the challenges that remain as the organization celebrates 25 years. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Footsteps fell where we now stand. This place we called St. Augustine. It was their home where they prayed and lived and dreamed. It was their home where they prayed and lived and dreamed. It was their home where they prayed and lived and dreamed.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. The Righteous Brothers, featuring founding member Bill Medley, comes to Jacksonville this March. You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin', Unchained Melody, and more on March 5th at Jack's Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets at fscjartistseries.org.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Elon Musk is one of the richest people in the world, and now one of the most politically powerful. What are the implications of his influence? From WAMU and NPR in Washington, this is